Welcome to this installment of the hospitality webinar series. I've shared my screen. I'm assuming that everyone can see it. If you are having any difficulties, please let me know and use the chat feature. At this time, I'd like to ask everyone except for Mike to mute their phones, as outside noise, room noise, etc., can make it difficult for people to hear. This installment of the hospitality webinar series, like all of our installments, is being recorded, and it will be made available, as with all of our previous recordings, on our results video library page on our website. So we invite you to, if you miss some details, to review it here or to share those links with your friends and colleagues. So a little bit about Mr. Burke. Mike is a partner with the law firm of Arnold Gold & Gregory. He's a partner in the corporate practice. He has been with AGG for over 3 years, 3+ years now, and he is also a major contributor to the development of the Venza Group's PCI compliance training modules. PCI compliance and corporate securities. Corporate securities is I guess the practice, your primary practice there at AGG. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mike. And
That's right.
That's correct. Great. Within that practice are the PCI compliance services that AGG provides. So we're very pleased to have you here with us, Mike, and I'll pass over the presenter rights to Mike to begin the webinar. Again, I ask that if you may, please mute your phone so that we minimize the room noise and so we can hear Mike clearly. So Mike,
all right, let's see.
Presenter rights.
Hey, and can everybody see the PowerPoint?
We sure can.
All right, okay. That's great. Daniel, thank you. And Daniel said, my name's Mike Burke. I'm a partner here in the D.C. office of Arnold Gold & Gregory. And one of the practice areas that I focus on is PCI compliance. And we wanted to use this webinar and take this opportunity to update folks on what's going on with Wyndham, a couple of other recent PCI-related breaches, and kind of the general question of what's next for PCI compliance. And what's next really is that version 3 of the PCI data security standards was released late last year in November of 2013 and becomes effective on January 1 of 2015, which means companies that are defined as merchants, like hotels and bars, restaurants, pretty much anybody in the hospitality industry that takes a credit card or a debit card for payment has to comply with version 3 starting as of January 1 of 2015. There were some changes to the PCI DSS as between version 2 and version 3. The 12 main requirements that I think everybody's seen and I know we've presented on before remain the same, but there are some changes that relate to malware defenses, vulnerability assessments, and penetration testing that really should be, deserves a little bit of extra review and can present a challenge for hotels and others in the hospitality industry. Between now and January 1st of 2015, merchants in the hospitality industry can comply with version 2 or version 3 of the data security standards. What we would be telling clients at this point would be to gear their resources to comply with version 3. That way they're not they're better set, better positioned for January 1 of 2015. There are a couple of common challenges in the hospitality industry when it comes to PCI compliance. I think we all know in large measure what they are. High-speed internet in common areas in rooms presents, if it's not properly firewalled or air-gapped, can present a risk point or a point of entry for those who might want to hack into a hotel's systems. An incredible number of point-of-sale systems. If you think about a hotel and if they have a restaurant or a spa or a golf course or a gift shop or and a front desk, there are a lot of different points of sale and a lot of different a lot of different points of sale in a lot of different areas. And this is going to come up when we talk about the vulnerability assessments, because there is a change that is going to impose a stricter requirement on hotels and other merchants to keep track of their point-of-sale terminals and point-of-sale systems. Hotels typically receive cardholder data from external systems such as the central reservation service, where that information is transmitted from a central point to a hotel and processed at the hotel. Again, there are certain issues about how long information should be kept, cardholder information, and what types of cardholder information, if any, should be kept. And the last challenge is actually something I read in one of those in-flight magazines. And then just as a test, I was in Chicago for a conference, and I looked around at the hotel I was staying at, and I can tell you that this idea of shared logins or leaving terminals open even after somebody at the front desk takes a break or gets off shift, that creates a significant risk point for merchants, for hotels, where a hacker could exploit and gain access to the controlled information or controlled data that a hotel handles. Going into the changes that I think are most relevant for the hospitality industry, the changes from version 2 to version 3 of the PCI data security standards. One big thing is now that there's an affirmative obligation in version 3 for merchants in the hospitality industry to adopt a standard to make sure that their cardholder data environments are properly segmented from other networks. In other words, making sure that you either have an air gap or a firewall or some other division between that part of your system that processes or holds cardholder data and everything else that you may have in the hotel, every other system, whether it's HR, your own internal accounts payable, or et cetera. This requirement was in the suggested category in version 2 of the data security standards, and now it's been moved up to a requirement. The version 3 does not tell us which of which standard to comply with, but most likely it's going to be this NIST SP 800-115, which is available off of NIST's website. This also will impact the qualified security assessors. So, certain merchants have to have a third-party QSA come in and inspect their systems, and the QSAs are now going to have to get up to speed on the standard to make sure that should hotels elect to implement the standard, that the QSAs understand what implementation of that standard looks like. For hotels, one practical challenge on this is going to be understanding your point-of-sale devices, where they are, what they do, and inspecting them. One of the biggest things that you'll find in data breaches where there's a PCI element is that a point-of-sale device, the card readers, the little things that sit on a counter in a store or a spa or at a front desk, they can be tampered with. And if they're tampered with, hackers will skim off cardholder information. This has happened frequently in the retail space where organized crime and other elements have been able to affect what I would consider large-scale replacements of point-of-sale devices in retail establishments that then skim off information from the card holders. So what this means, the follow-on to this is that hotels are either going to have to train, they're going to have to identify relevant employees and train them to understand what the point-of-sale device should look like and what are common points of tampering. Of course, one of the other challenges is when you have systems that might be maintained by outside personnel. Your application vendors, your system integrators. They will have access to your systems, and hotels will need to better understand, better map out where those third-party providers interface with your cardholder data environment. One of these things, again, I talked about taking and keeping the inventories, providing employee training about point-of-sale security, and this is a big thing for the penetration testing and risk assessments. Under the old version 2, it required that a risk assessment should be performed annually by the merchant. Now it changes to be annually or more frequently if there's a significant change made to the cardholder data environment. One issue the version 3 does not do is define a significant change. So it's kind of, it's left to the hotels to determine what's a significant change. Is it adding a new point-of-sale device? Is it updating software? I mean, there's a significant discussion about what constitutes a significant change for purposes of triggering a new risk assessment, and the discussions mostly online and on some of the PCI-related chat rooms. But this is going to be a big deal for hotels because significant change. The ambiguity in that phrase gives those that enforce the PCI standards, Visa, MasterCard, Amex, JCB, et cetera, an opportunity to, if there is a breach, to potentially point out an area of liability for a hotel if they didn't perform a risk assessment when there was a significant change. Long story short, I'd recommend that the phrase be construed conservatively. Not to say that a risk assessment gets done at every single time something changes in the cardholder data environment, but I would suggest that the definition of significant is probably lower than it would be in common usage, and you may be doing more risk assessments than you had been doing in the past. Also, with penetration testing, there's a requirement that an employee's access rights to the cardholder data environment be specifically based on that person's job function, which suggests that there are going to be a set of employees who don't need to have access to the cardholder data environment and should not have access. The other piece of this is that the access be revoked immediately upon that employee's termination. One issue that has cropped up from time to time, is the question of old authorizations, using the authorizations from people who are no longer employed at the hotel to gain access to the cardholder data environment. One thing that will help, kind of in the general sense, is this the requirement for an up-to-date diagram, so hotels can visualize how payment card information flows across their networks. This is going to be an important thing that a QSA will ask hotels in the inspection process, but it also, is a helpful item for hotels to understand where risk points may exist. There already is a requirement from time to time to provide that kind of information, or provide the architecture for a hotel's IT systems, but this is a little bit more specific in that it relates to the payment card information. And this is another change, is hotels will now have to implement a process to respond to any alert generated by their file change detection system. This is another ambiguous area in that there's contradictory language in version 3, in the sense that the intention here is not to make hotels track down every alert, but to track down significant alerts. We all know that change detection systems can generate various and sundry alerts of differing, significantly different severity. It's got to be up to the hotel, and it will be up to the hotel to decide at what point, what level of alert, what type of alert requires a response. I think a hotel, just like any other merchant, could spend all day, every day, responding to each and every alert, and I don't think that's what PCI security group intended when they updated to version 3. But again, the requirement's there that you investigate and respond to these alerts. Another change relates to service providers, and this is going to come back when we talk a little bit about Target in a few slides. But hotels need to, through contractual and other means, ensure that those third-party service providers who have access to the hotel's cardholder data environment, they not only have and use unique authentication credentials, but they actually accept, the third-party service providers accept and acknowledge that they have responsibility for protecting any cardholder data that may come into their hands. Now, primarily, this is going to drive slightly longer contracts, as between hotels and third-party service providers. An allocation of risk in the contract, and defining each party's responsibilities as to the cardholder data. But this is what PCI is trying to do, is to force or ensure that hotels and other merchants don't use third-party service providers who are unaware of these PCI requirements. Not that many would be, but there are gaps there. One way to deal with this would be, the last bullet point talks about maintaining a matrix of the PCI requirements, and then assigning responsibility for compliance with each requirement, either to the hotel, and I would argue that the hotel probably should keep some measure of responsibility for all of the requirements, but also working with your third-party service provider to ensure that they see and they understand and they accept that they will have some responsibility for protecting cardholder information. Sorry, that jumped ahead. Wyndham. The last, big, whoops, I'm going entirely the wrong way. The last change coming out of PCI DSS version 3 is malware. Now, this is an interesting thing that generally there always has been the requirement that a hotel or other merchant keep their antivirus or anti-malware software up to date. But now the requirement has changed slightly to it's not just keeping the software up to date for your cardholder data environment, but for any system that the hotel maintains that could be affected by malicious software. Now this, typically Apple computers, and there'll be a brief on this shortly, since their software operating systems based off of Unix, traditionally they're less vulnerable to hacking than Microsoft Windows-based systems. That's no longer the case, but what that means is even where a hotel has made a determination in the past that a certain part of its software really shouldn't be affected by malware, they now need to go back and make that assessment again and ensure that any relevant system has appropriately updated and maintained anti-malware software. The other piece of this new requirement is that there must be a process in place for specific authorization from hotel management to disable or change the operation of these antivirus or anti-malware software, and that any disabling of the antivirus, anti-malware software be time limited. Wyndham update, I know in the title of this we talked about Wyndham and White and what's next. Wyndham is fighting the Federal Trade Commission in federal court based on a series of data breaches that ended a few years ago, or I think the last one was about 2 years ago. This is here to illustrate a couple of things. One thing is, we all know with PCI compliance you face some liability exposure to the banks, to your Visa, MasterCard card issuers, and other groups. But you also face risk exposure to the Federal Trade Commission, which has traditionally taken the view that a failure to properly observe and implement data security is itself a breach of Section 5 of the Federal Trade Commission Act. In essence, failure to have proper information security is a restricted trade practice or an unfair trade practice. Wyndham has a breach. They investigate the breach. The FTC sues Wyndham in federal court for unfair trade practices, in essence using the breach as evidence that they did not have proper information security. What's interesting about this case is typically PCI-related investigations don't get this far. That once the FTC gets involved, the vast majority of merchants will settle with the FTC rather than fight them in court. Wyndham has taken a different view and said that there is no explicit statutory power that the Federal Trade Commission has to to enforce data security standards, because again, PCI is a privately developed standard, and so part of Wyndham's argument is that the FTC is not the proper entity to be enforcing PCI, and that further, in the absence of a federal statute dealing with information security, the FTC has no grounds to enforce any data security standard. And this has been, the interesting thing is where the federal court will come out on this. Obviously, it would not undo previously reached settlements that the FTC has reached with hotels and other merchants that have experienced a breach, but it could change the landscape on the question of how PCI is enforced and could cause merchants that suffer a breach to fight back harder against the FTC. Target, if you're like me, you had your credit card compromised around Christmas time, and then you got a note from Target telling you that happened. One thing, Target has maintained that they were PCI compliant. One lesson out of this is that PCI compliance is not a guarantee that a breach would occur. What we understand, or what we what we think we understand about the Target breach is that a third-party contractor in Pennsylvania that had access to Target systems was itself the subject of a phishing attack. That phishing attack enabled hackers to get into Target's systems and triggered the breach. Unfortunately for Target, at the time the attack occurred, they had just completed a variety of system updates and upgrades that made their systems more vulnerable for a breach. And this gets back to the earlier change with PCI version 3 about, well, how often should a company respond to a security warning? Is there a point at which a response, in essence, is crying wolf? And the last point on this is with Target, as with any breach, the card, what Visa, MasterCard, what the PCI folks do is they do what's called a common point of purchase determination. They take a look at all the compromised cards and try to determine if there's one common point, if all the cardholders at some time or another within a defined time period shopped at Target or stayed at a specific hotel. That's how they narrow down how to identify where a breach took place. Again, one thing to keep in mind, at least Target's spending at least $17 million to investigate and remedy the breach. There's at least 53 lawsuits, including some class actions, filed so far against Target. Banks are pushing back pretty hard on Target in asking them to indemnify for the costs of issuing new cards, etc. Two other quick things. There was some interest closer to when the Target breach hit about a possible legislative response to the breach in terms of Congress adopting a federal law on information security. That's died down a little bit. It doesn't look likely in this Congress that this would happen, but the conversation is ongoing about whether there should be a federal law on this. One other issue that has come up in connection or in the conversation about the Target breach is whether card issuers in the U.S. should implement the EMV smart card standard. For those of you who've been to Europe, they have a chip in each card that verifies, it is a contributing factor to the fact that in Europe there are far fewer breaches of cardholder information than there are in the U.S. And the thinking is, the U.S. is one of the few countries that does not adhere to the EMV smart card standard, and the question is, should we, in order to reduce the risk and damage from breaches. And so that's, again, that's going to be a little bit farther off, but something I think people should keep in mind. White lodging, we've started to see some information on this. They manage about 150 hotels. What the thinking right now is that memory parsing malware infected a point-of-sale system. Again, that gets back to the earlier discussion on the new obligation on hotels to inspect and observe their point-of-sale terminals to make sure that they're not tampered with. If memory parsing malware infected a point-of-sale system, it's likely it came in because a point-of-sale terminal was tampered with. We don't think there's any, from what we've seen, there's no indication that the breach has spread up to the hotel chains that where White Lodging manages certain hotels. They manage a couple of Marriotts and Hyatts. We don't have any indication that the breach has expanded upwards to other Marriotts that are not managed, for example, by White Lodging. But still, there's a possible spillover effect from negative publicity that relates to a breach. And we've seen this with Target. We're seeing this with White Lodging, that consumers are increasingly concerned and in some ways voting with their feet about how negative publicity about a breach dictates their purchasing habits. Very quickly, I spoke earlier about the Apple operating system. This gets back to 2 points about the malware change in PCI version 3. One is, it used to be that Apple software was viewed as not being as susceptible to a breach or as susceptible to a hacker as a Windows-based system. I guess that is decreasingly true. The second piece is it's imperative to keep their anti-malware and anti-virus software up to date. What happened with the Apple operating system was a flaw was identified that made the software vulnerable to what they call a man-in-the-middle attack, meaning that any person, a hacker, that as long as that hacker had a signed certificate from a trusted certification authority, they could, the hacker could, in essence, put himself in between a user and a website that uses SSL, or the secure sockets layer, for encryption. Now think about that. You could have had somebody get in between you as a user and the payment page at Amazon.com. You wouldn't see it, Amazon wouldn't see it, but your card information would end up going not just to Amazon, but to the hacker doing this man-in-the-middle attack. So again, it's important to keep system software, anti-malware software up to date, and also to think a little bit more expansively about possible risks. And this is the last, in the changing face of some of these PCI requirements, the emphasis is increasingly on having hotels train their employees, not necessarily ones who may fit into a narrow definition of needing to know, but perhaps that definition of needing to know should be a little more broadly defined. But there needs to be security training at the IT level for the hotels and the chains, but specifically the hotels, for hotel management, and what I would call hotel employees, people who work at the front desk or the spa or at a gift shop, who handle cardholder information, who process payments for cardholders, or whose job includes interfacing with the point-of-sale terminal. Those 3 groups of people need to be trained at least annually on PCI compliance. Arguably, if there's a new person coming in, you may include PCI training as part of the intake process. And this training, hotels, in the event of a breach, a hotel will have to show not only that this training occurred, but the relevant people took the training and how well they scored on the training. And one of the products, and Dan talked about this, the Venza modules that deal with PCI training can fill those needs. It's not just the training, but it's tracking who takes the course and certifying that people pass the course however you choose to define passing. So again, the important thing is to do this training, have a policy and process in place to react to a breach, but again, most effectively, and I'll conclude with this, is to take steps to avoid having a breach in the first place. And Daniel, I know I'm a little bit over time. I think we can take some questions if that's okay.
Great. I mean, jam-packed full of information, Mike. I mean, fantastic. I have a couple questions, but I want to open it up to the floor if there's someone with that's got a question that they're just burning to ask. I'll just jump in with my first question, and then if you do have a question, and you can get over your shyness, please just jump right in. But my first question is, you were talking about some of the changes in version 3.0, and you referenced significant change, and then when you got to the target breach, reference, the significant change. Do you suppose that, what came first, the significant change, the reference to the change in the software system for Target, and or in version 3? I mean, chronologically, is it's just seemed kind of coincidental that there is this phrase significant change in both instances.
Yeah, it sure does look coincidental. And just to muddy the waters a little bit, there has been some discussion, some not totally substantiated, that Target may not have been PCI compliant at the time of the breach, which would be an incredible bit of information. But chronologically, it appears that Target did its system upgrades, then was compromised. The time that they were breached was about the time version 3.0 was released. So at this point, I would say it falls much more into the line of being a heck of a coincidence as opposed to a reaction. But I would, again, I think most folks understand that when there is a system upgrade, that is a vulnerable time, and I think that was probably in the background or in the back of people's minds as they developed version 3. It just so happens Target was breached very close in time to that.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else have a question? Question or comment? I'm just wondering about the EMV chips.
Mm-hmm.
You referenced that more PCI, more breaches are occurring in the U.S. where we don't have the chip.
Yeah.
From previous presentations, one of yours and other presentations that I've witnessed, and seminars that I've been a participant in, talk about the conversion to having the chip and pin infrastructure on stateside. It would be a considerable investment. I mean, it would be it would be huge, a massive.
Well, you'd have to, yeah. I mean, you'd have to reissue every card.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, look, I look in my wallet and I've got a couple cards, debit and credit cards. So multiply that by 300 million people.
Yeah.
And then you've got to change.
Terminals.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I just remember, I had this experience. I was traveling overseas traveling in Germany. You get off the plane, you go to buy a train ticket. Well, you can't use a U.S. style credit card in their automated ticket, automated ticket machine. You've got to go up to the
teller.
Teller, and so that's if the switch gets flipped on the EMV standard, you've got to change all the point of sale terminals.
Yeah.
And then so that the cost of that are
staggering.
Huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's been the primary obstacle to implementing that standard here, and it's also unclear that whether you could phase in the EMV standard over a period of time, and I'm not sure you can, because again, unless you're willing to have 2 point-of-sale terminals at a checkout counter, one that's EMV compliant and one that's geared towards the U.S. Card. So
well, I'm just wondering, given the amount of costs, I mean, has there been an analysis done that says this is how much it's going to cost, but there will be this level of security, or is because just saying that there are fewer breaches were these? Is there a causal? Is someone say there is a causal relationship between greater security and the?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know. I'm sure somebody has done that type of analysis. I haven't found it yet, but I think you could at a very granular level, talk about how much data breaches cost, or how much PCI-related data breaches cost banks, cardholders, merchants in the U.S., compare that to the costs in, say, the European Union, because it's approximately the same or similar population basis, and say, well, we're incurring a higher per capita cost in the U.S. by keeping the standard we have, and that by lowering that cost over the span of 5 or 10 years, a switch to the EMV standard would would pay for itself. I don't know that anybody's done. I mean, I'm sure somebody has. I just haven't seen that kind of analysis.
Well, very good. Those are my two primary questions. Has anyone else got a? Don't be shy.
Daniel, if we want to get in touch with Mike offline and have a more detailed conversation, how do we get in touch with him?
I think you've got a slide there, Mike, haven't you, with your
Oh, yeah, I do. The last slide. Sorry about that. Well, that's not it. Yeah, my contact information's here. My phone number's, like it says, 202-677-4046 or mike.burke@agg.com. I'm happy to talk in more detail about this.
Great. Thank you.
Excellent stuff. And again, this webinar has been recorded and will be available on our video library. And so just jam-packed full of great information, Mike. Always a pleasure to have you presenting.
My pleasure, Daniel. Thank you.
So unless there are any other questions, I will stop the recording and bid everyone farewell and a good afternoon for you. Any last burning questions, anyone? Well, again, thank you, Mike, for a great webinar, great information, and if you do have any questions for Mike, that's your contact information, or you certainly can reach out to me, and I will put you in contact with him straight away. So thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon, and we'll see you next time.